Hi all, I have another mega exciting game to show you of Leela 61007, the James Bond version ID of Leela, the latest 60 network. So this is white against Xiphos, and this is in the Vienna game, the dreaded Frankenstein Dracula variation. So Leela plays e4, after e5 we played the Vienna game, knight f6, and now bishop c4. If you don't want violent complications, g3 is a very interesting move, solid. But if you want to take some risks and have a wild, crazy game, wild, crazy time, bishop c4, inviting knight takes e4. So now, if you take then d5 and black's absolutely equalized. So the critical test is going for f7, that's soft spot for anything checkmate. Knight d6. And here you can actually take the pawn, but it's a bit dull. More interesting is bishop b3. And so we have the idea here after knight c6 for knight b5, trying to lure that knight away from f7. g6, queen f3. So this is all known territory. f5, queen d5. This has all been seen before. And even this remarkable exchange sacrifice, queen e7, offering a whole rook after knight takes a8. So this is the crazy scene to start off games. Very, very interesting. So we have b6, and now we're departing opening territory. So what does Leela do here? d3. Now Xiphos plays knight d4. Okay, so very, very interesting position, and it already gets a bit strange. After knight d4, it does seem there's a very nasty idea of immediately playing bishop b7, getting on this diagonal, hitting g2, and white seems completely underdeveloped. In this position, interestingly, the move knight takes b6 was played. So very, very complicated. If bishop b7, that gives white various options like queen c5, for example, or queen a5, and that knight still hasn't been taken, so it's taken immediately. So there's the big idea of bishop b7 now, and here we have a strange looking move, queen a8. Okay, it pins the bishop, so delaying bishop b7, which is supported by the knight. We have king c7 unpinning, seems a very, very logical move to play bishop b7. We have now knight f3, bishop b7, and the queen goes to a4, so this is one of the key points. Very strange maneuver indeed. I just haven't seen too many games a bit like this, just bouncing off a8. So what is actually going on here? And it gets absolutely mad here. If white had played queen a7, then the queen is a tactical target. It looks as though it's trappable, and you'd be right. Black could play the nifty bishop h6 to accelerate trapping the queen. So for example, after bishop takes, knight takes, and then just trap the queen, black will be winning. So queen a4, and we have knight takes f3, g takes, bishop takes f3. Now there's madness, total madness in this game actually. I thought myself that queen a8 to a4 is completely outrageous, but it gets even more outrageous now. Can you guess what white plays in this position? The rook is attacked. Would you just move the rook? If I give you 5 seconds to pause the video here, what would you play? Okay, it gets completely crazy. Bishop e3. What is going on here? Offering the rook here. Black actually played king b7. If bishop takes h1, then actually it turns out queen a7 check is actually pretty good after bishop takes b6, threatening to checkmate on c7. It's very difficult for black to do anything about this, it seems. If bishop b7, it looks as though there's resources like bishop d5. This is intriguing, but the resources like this exist as an example. So we actually have knight b5 protecting c7 with tempo. Queen a6, bishop b7, queen takes. This position is actually going to be rather good for white. That's very good for white. These pawns are ready to roll with tempo gainers of both bishops. So, in fact, black actually perhaps looked at some of that stuff and played king b7, not taking the rook. So is white doomed here? We have actually another outrageous move. Guess what white plays here? Okay, queen b4, just offering the rook again. And it's not as though there's a forced checkmate. Black actually did take here. Now, if white takes with the queen on b6, the king can go here, but where is the checkmate? Here, the bishop drops back. There's nothing. So, in fact, bishop takes b6 was played. And this covers some of the escape routes and leaves potential for checking the black king. We have king c8, queen a5, knight e8, and calmly, a piece down, white just castles queenside. Okay, this also hits the bishop. It also supports the idea of d4 sometimes, if the rook might want to come into the game potentially. But there's also pressure on the centre. There's a loose piece on h8 to think about. It's very, very interesting dynamic position for the piece. So if we count pawns, 3, 4, 5, 4, 5, 6. White's a pawn for the piece at the moment. That extra knight for black. We have bishop b7, rook e1, and it looks as though, yes, the pressure is being coordinated on e5. There's also the option of f4 or d4. We have bishop g7, f4 is used. And actually this is pounced on with a pin, bishop h6. We have queen c3 check, bishop c6, and Stockfish, when analysing this, gives king b8 as an interesting alternative to bishop c6. But then eventually, considers bishop c6 not bad either. So what's going on? King b8, it doesn't seem entirely that clear how white proceeds. If bishop e3, this position technically, it seems as though black's doing fine. But in the event anyway, bishop c6, which also initially, was thought to be reasonable, it is going into a pin. We have the quiet move, king b1. This is really, really curious stuff. Black grabs another pawn, bishop takes f4, but now there's d4. And in fact, in this particular configuration, the queen is protecting the rook. And if e takes d4, this didn't happen, then bishop takes d4. So hitting that rook, that will be good for white to win that rook. This would be a very nice position. So we have actually, if king b7, then queen here, this is quite dangerous. It turns out actually this might actually be okay with bishop d2, a very tactical resource, which apparently saves black from too much damage. It should be about equal technically. So there's some crazy stuff going on there. So yeah, it does seem as though maybe king b7 might have been the way to go there. Interesting move, attacking that bishop. But we have in this game e4, and now d5. These pawns are rolling, and that does expose an attack on the rook as well. Bishop e5 hitting the queen, protecting the rook. Queen c4. We have knight c7. So this offers the bishop to try and dampen white's pressure. D takes. D takes. And now a4 is played. So yeah, white here is only some pawns down. 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Only a pawn down now. So yeah, it's looking a little bit better technically. c3. We have knight d5 being played. Queen d5 should be okay as well. For example, like this, it should be fairly okay for both sides, about even. So knight d5. We have bishop f2, queen b7, and the pawns are getting a bit menacing after a5. And here it does seem there's a critical mistake played by black, which really loses the balance of the game. Knight c7 was played. It seems that king b8 might be the way to go. For example, a6, queen c7, bishop c5, and it's not entirely clear on initial analysis how the compensation is there. Black, potentially has got good prospects here, but it's balanced by white. It should be about even. But with this move, instead, knight c7, it turns out here, black's in big difficulty now after this move, bishop b6. It's almost as if there's a really strong bind on the position, creating, you know, zugzwang potential. We have Queen A6, very tricky position indeed. If Rook D8, just to demonstrate that a little bit, it seems Queen F7 is just really awkward for black. For example, Bishop F4, Rook F1, putting the bishop back there for Queen E7. And now it's just really uncomfortable. For example, here, Queen F6, Queen A6, Rook D1. And what is black actually doing now? It seems as though this is zugzwang. If Bishop E7, Rook takes, and then Bishop E6 check. And this is terrible. That pawn is actually holding the bishop, which is creating a kind of mating potential. So that's really disastrous. It does seem as though this position is very, very tricky. So Queen A6, offering C6. And yes, black's on the way out now. These pawns are, you know, a very strong passed pawn potential. Here, Queen C5, Queen B5. We have now the nifty Bishop E6 check. So of course if takes, then Queen takes B5. But this gives more potential for the passed pawns now. Once the bishop now goes to D5, it's spearing the queening square, looking at that potential queening square of the A pawn. So the queens come off, A6, and it's white that's now going to be material up after this. After Bishop C7, A7, black is having to give up a piece, but still has all these passed pawns. Can Leela hold this? Bishop takes H2, so 4 connected passed pawns. Bishop D4, hitting the rook moves C4, H5, B4. White's pawns, though, might be quicker here. Bishop G3, Rook A1. The rook's coming in to the game to start harassing the black king. King B3 with nasty threats. E3, check. Bishop B8. If King D7, for example, like this, is lots of annoying checks, which could result eventually in just taking there and fine. You know, these pawns are just too slow here. White's absolutely winning there. So Bishop B8, Bishop A7, King C7, just taking off everything and going into this endgame is enough. These pawns are just not good enough here. So this happens after Bishop E6. The 2 connected passed pawns for white mean, and also the bishop blockading on key light squares here. These pawns are not actually good enough in this position. The game actually ended. Sorry, here the game actually ended here. It was, you know, adjudicated. Both sides thought it was like more than +8. If the game continued, then B5, E2, for example, like this, is absolutely winning for white. So I'll take you to that game end position. So it is one of the most crazy opening variations that exists in chess, the Frankenstein Dracula. And there is some really, really strange stuff going on in this game with knight takes B6, Queen A4, Queen A8 to A4, offering the rook, going back to B4, playing bishop takes. It's just very, very weird stuff indeed. And at one point, you know, this virtual zugzwang scenario where black's really tied up and losing material. I know it's a very fast time control, but even, you know, computers nowadays very powerful. They see a great deal, but it's amazing, really, some of the concepts here that, you know, demonstrated. So I hope you enjoyed that. And if you want to know more about the Frankenstein Dracula variation, there's a course link here. It's, I think, a good variation for playing to improve your tactics, if nothing else, of weird and wonderful positions. So if you want to, you know, play for both sides there's interesting nuances and resources explained. So Kingscrusher TV /Dracula. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this. Okay, thanks very much.